The gravity distortions had started 8 hours before the object was even visible on long-range optics. And by the time the Terran science vessel Halberd locked visual confirmation on the massive structure in orbit around the dead neutron star, it had already twisted local space into a shallow bowl of decaying time signatures, did not broadcast a distress signal, nor did it show damage, heat, or purpose. Yet everyone who saw it knew it had been waiting and not for rescue commander. Ayla Tran, head of the Accord Recon Division, stood at the forefront of the diplomatic delegation because she had built her career on never blinking first. A strategist who believed patience was more valuable than speed, and that diplomacy backed by readiness was the only real deterrent in deep space politics. Her expression was unreadable, but every muscle beneath her uniform was taut with calculation. Beside her stood Lieutenant Tariq Amandi, her operations lead, younger, sharper, and known across 2 quadrants for field improvisation. That bordered on insubordination. But Ayla trusted him because he had never once broken his word, and because his instincts often whispered things before logic caught upon the other side of the docking corridor. Framed in the harsh white lighting of the Zalith cruiser Varuan stood strategist Virex Thal, a crystalline intelligence housed within a bipedal organic exosuit. Its species renowned for their patience, but feared for their precision in conflict resolution. And beside it floated an empath sentinel, a telepathic translator encased in a transparent sphere of null gel, drifting silently, reading emotional. Fields like weather currents, none of them spoke as the boarding umbilical pressurized and locked with the black ship, a vessel too smooth, too geometrically perfect, and too dark to be made by any of the known 17 civilizations of the galactic Accord, its surface swallowing all visible light as though it had been constructed not to be seen, but to be remembered. We proceed with shared protocols, Ayla said calmly, stepping forward first, her voice echoing in the sealed bridge. No weapons drawn, no data copies made, and no split paths until initial mapping completes. This is a neutral artifact, and we will treat it as such. Virex Thal gave a series of harmonic chimes that translated into consent, but the undertone was cold, almost bored, as if this entire process was a formality before something far more significant was to unfold inside the black ship. The air adjusted itself without machinery. Light came from no visible source, and the architecture had no corners, just seamless curves and long passages that bent into themselves like memory palaces without doors. The floor responded to each footstep with a soundless acknowledgement, and though no motion was seen, it felt as if the walls were listening. "We're being scanned," Amandi said quietly, not raising his weapon but resting his hand near it. Not just biologically personality matrices, strategic profile layers, even dream logs from childhood memory implants. This thing is pulling more data than any artifact I've ever walked into. And still, the Jalith moved ahead without hesitation, their path dividing slightly from the humans at a shallow curve, the kind of branching that violated nothing in the letter of their agreement, but twisted its spirit into something unrecognizable. "Pull them back," Ayla said, signaling her internal calm, but before the command fully transmitted, the walls around them rippled and realigned, closing corridors behind both teams and rearranging every path forward, like a puzzle folding in reverse contact. With the Zalith team ended without alarm, without interference, just a gentle dissolution of signal clarity followed by silence that had weight to it. "We're being separated," Amandi said, trying to trace routes back through the entrance. "Doors are sealed behind geometry. There's no locking mechanism, just absence of path." "Still calm, still in control," Ayla replied. "They're testing boundaries, not physical ones, but diplomatic, psychological, strategic. This ship is watching how we respond under stress and uncertainty. It's an intelligence we haven't met before." For 2 hours they continued inward, every wall pristine, every turn unique. Yet nothing repeated. No messages, no power source, and no signs of life, until a chamber opened that was unlike the others. Its center filled with a low-standing structure that resembled a console made of memory stone. A material humans had never manufactured, but, seen once on a lost Zalith research moon Ayla, reached for her communicator, intending to log the coordinates for joint analysis. But the moment she tapped the control, the console responded with a projection of her own face, only slightly older, scarred across the right temple, and speaking words she hadn't yet spoken. "Leave it," she whispered, not sure if to herself or to the ghost in front of her, but the ghost turned and looked at her directly, then dissolved into mist. They were not alone, but nothing had truly greeted them, either back on the Terran ship. Contact with both boarding parties dropped entirely 4 hours later. The docking corridor retracted on its own, the airlock sealed, and from the emptiness of the black ship's shadow, a figure stepped onto the docking platform, wearing Terran recon armor marked with Alden Rhodes unit code Alden, who had been part of Amandi's flank team, and who was now staring at the officers behind the observation glass like he knew exactly what they were going to ask. His biometrics failed every scan. His blood was still warm, but no longer human, and when he finally spoke, his voice was measured, articulate, and full of something that wasn't emotion, but memory rewritten through something far older than Earth itself. "I was chosen because I asked the question," he said calmly, eyes fixed ahead. "Now they want to know what your answer will be." His body passed every visual test and failed every technical one. His bones were in the right place. His muscles responded to pressure. His voice carried the exact cadence of Lieutenant Alden Rhodes. But beneath the surface, his nervous system, no longer mapped to anything human-built machines could track. He remembered his mother's name, the brand of field rations he hated, and the orbital drop coordinates from his last mission in the Argento Belt. But when asked for his unit's call and response code, a protocol etched into every soldier's neural thread, he paused, smiled slightly, and gave a variation that had not yet been written into Regulation Commander. Ayla Tran did not raise her voice during debriefing, nor did she move when the room's tension turned brittle. She simply studied him as one might study a living paradox. A leader whose strength was not in fearlessness, but in understanding the cost of ignoring the improbable. "Tell me what happened." "Inside," she said, fingers laced in front of her on the steel desk, the one built into the wall of Isolation Bay Theta, deep beneath the secure core of the halberd, where no signal came in or out without 9 clearance. Eldon, if that was still his name, looked at her with a calm so unnatural it felt rehearsed. "I met the Codex," he replied, not blinking, not shifting. "It is not a library, not a device. Not in the way you think. It is a living record of possibility, one that reacts to perception and belief. And the moment we boarded the ship, it began reading us. Not just our past or our thoughts, but our futures, until they weren't futures anymore." When Amandi reviewed the logs, he found that Alden had returned carrying 2 implants humans had never designed, fused into his spinal architecture with no entry scars, pulsating in patterns that formed language, but which no translation algorithm could decode. They weren't transmitting, they were absorbing worse. His vitals no longer fluctuated naturally. They were fixed in patterns that defied random biological variance, like a man existing on an internal loop, waiting to be triggered by an unseen command. The Zalith were the first to react officially, their cruiser beaming a high-priority demand. To the Council's emergency session, termination of the returnee, total lockdown of the ship, and criminal charges against the human delegation for violation of Treaty Protocol 3.4, which forbade extraction of sentient technology from a Category U artifact strategist. Virex Thou addressed the Council directly, its voice cold but layered with authority, a symphonic tone that translated as judicial clarity. "This entity is not what it claims to be. It is an echo shaped in your image, constructed to deceive or record. either of which constitutes existential risk if left uncontained. Earth's ambassador, Rachel Singh, pushed back with measured confidence, reminding the assembly that no act of aggression had occurred, no evidence of replication or attack had been observed, and that moral protocol demanded analysis before action. We do not execute what we do not understand. We investigate it. The room grew divided, not in rage, but in ideology, as the older species, the Istrans, the Velari, the Kotari, all recalled echoes of their own early contacts with forces they had feared too, quickly or misunderstood too Ladiela, returned to shipboard command, but still carrying the weight of what had been brought back, stepped into the Council's private feed later that cycle and said quietly, "If this thing learned how to become human, we should be asking what it saw in us that made that choice preferable." What disturbed her most was not what Alden had said, but what he hadn't. Never once asked about the others. Not about Omandi, not about the rest of his team, not even about the mission parameters. He only spoke of what came next, of what would happen, unless humanity chose differently. Though he never explained what that choice was back on the observation deck, Ayla reviewed one final detail in silence. Footage of Alden standing in the re-entry bay just moments after returning from the black ship, unaware he was being recorded, except he looked straight into the hidden lens, eyes sharp and oddly still, and whispered words the audio barely captured. They won't understand what they opened until it rewrites one of them too. The first kinetic strike came without warning. 12 tungsten rods dropped at terminal velocity from a Zalith orbital platform onto Terran research outpost Tyrell 9, a civilian facility focused on xenolinguistic modeling, unshielded and lightly staffed. Its destruction was complete in under 4 seconds. No declaration preceded it. No demand followed it. Only a formal statement entered into the Dominion's diplomatic ledger, accusing the Terran Accord of withholding live technology derived from a Category U artifact, violating the core tenets of the Galactic Accord commander. Ayla Tran, in full uniform, stood before the Terran Strategic Assembly in orbit above Mars, her voice steady as she delivered the post-attack debrief, offering no personal commentary, no outrage, only precise numbers: 72 civilian researchers dead, 47 support personnel unaccounted for, and a gravity well signature that confirmed Dominion strike craft had observed the detonation from less than 1 light minute away. The attack was not a reaction, she said flatly, standing in front of the high table where Earth's defense Council now sat in closed session. It was a decision made before we even confirmed the artifact's nature, which means we were never meant to hold it, only to provoke their response. The Accord authorized a full defensive posture within the hour. Fleets recalled, diplomatic envoys frozen, and deep space listening posts rerouted toward Dominion frontiers. But amid all the movement, the one variable they couldn't account for had vanished. Alden Rhodes, whatever he had become, had escaped. Containment without triggering a single alarm. The security logs showed nothing unusual. No door breach, no access override, just a gentle blackout across 4 deck cameras, and then an empty room where he had stood. It was not sabotage. Not even stealth. It was permission, granted from systems no human had programmed. And then, as if to make matters worse, the black ship moved, no engines activated, no visible propulsion emitted, and yet its position shifted 0.4 astronomical units toward the center of the system in a maneuver that defied orbital mechanics. And more troubling still, the surrounding gravitational field bent inward in a way that should have torn nearby ships apart, but instead passed through them. Like liquid time. Hours later, long-range telescopes picked up a second object, one not listed in any registry, emerging from deep space with a vector that placed it just outside Sol's edge, within 2 days sleek, asymmetrical and matte gray. It lacked the elegance of the black ship, but radiated something darker, something designed with a black ship distorted gravity. This second vessel screamed through it, dragging a visible wake of matter and radiation in its path, like it had cut through dimensions to arrive at. The same time, secure channels lit up with a single message Alden appeared on Earth's classified quantum feed. No transmitter, no known signal origin. Speaking directly into the Council's emergency board, the archive was never abandoned. He said, his tone calm, almost compassionate. It was sealed so that nothing born after it could find it. And now you have, which means they will come. The room fell silent, not from shock, but from recognition. His phrasing implied more than one ship, more than one force, something plural, something coordinated. The Dominion was quick to issue a public statement blaming Earth for breaching containment and drawing ancient threats into navigable space. But behind closed doors, their diplomats requested a classified summit, the first since the end of the War of Thermic Silence. They were afraid a joint task force was formed in secrecy, Operation Mirror Lance, a collaboration between Terran cyber strategists and Zalith memory engineers, not out of trust, but necessity. Human Admiral Kyra Morgan, promoted from the Soul Defense Front, assumed command of the human side of the task force. A woman known for turning disadvantage into doctrine, and more importantly, for seeing the game before others even knew it had started. The Zalith offered neural symbiosis technology, a method of embedding memory paths from one consciousness into a shared virtual lattice, a practice banned in human law for its invasiveness. But Alden's presence had already rewritten the rulebook. Morgan reviewed the risk and authorized the Singhalden, or the entity inhabiting his memory, agreed without hesitation. As the team engaged the process, their minds linked with the evolving construct within Alden, and for 6 minutes they were shown not just simulations, but futures, dozens of them, possible outcomes, branching outward from this very moment. And in nearly all of them, one thing was clear: the gray ship was not alone, and in every simulation where humanity fought back using conventional means, Earth did not just lose. It vanished. No remains, no aftermath, no recovery. The Codex had not just recorded future events, it had redirected them, and now something had answered the signal it sent out the moment humans walked inside, something that did not forget and never forgave curiosity without permission. Admiral Kyra Morgan had never believed in inevitability, not during the orbital siege of Oberon, not during the decades of cold silence with the Dominion, and certainly not now, as she reviewed a strategic forecast that ended in planetary deletion across 94% of modeled timelines. Still, she did not flinch. "We planned for the 6%, she said to her task force. Standing at the center of a rotating projection that displayed the approach vector of the gray ship, "We build branches of response the enemy hasn't yet anticipated. Can we use what we have that no other species ever has choice without?" Submission. What unnerved her most wasn't the power of the unknown ship, or even the predictive nature of the Codex. It was Alden, or what Alden had become. He was no longer just a man with altered biology. He was a vessel of converging identities, a hybrid shaped by information no mind should hold, capable of seeing 10 layers into every consequence, and yet still speaking in the familiar tone of a Terran officer. "I do not want to control the outcome," he said during one of their secured meetings. "Eyes steady, but not warm. I want you to survive it. Because if you survive this, you change the game for every other species watching." Morgan didn't trust him, but she did believe him, so she gave him access to simulation matrices reserved for only the highest war councils, and what he did inside those systems defied every known limitation. He ran prediction loops at speeds beyond quantum limits, reconfiguring battle logic not by weapon strength, but by cascading psychological patterns, projecting how the enemy might interpret not what humans do, but why they do it. The Zalith watched silently, disturbed but fascinated, their strategists unable to deny that whatever Alden was, he was not working against them, They proposed an integration, his mind into their neural web for 6 minutes. A shared collective thinking event, something that had never included an outsider before Alden agreed inside the lattice. One Zealot strategist broke link 6 seconds in, whispering one word before collapsing, "Futures." The rest stayed until the end, emerging visibly altered, subdued in posture and speech. They saw what Alden saw: a galaxy reordered not through weapons or invasions, but through storylines rewritten at the origin point wars that never happened because they never could. Ideas silenced before birth, not by force, but by predictive subtraction. Meanwhile, the gray ship arrived at the outer edge of Sol, stopping exactly on the line where human satellites could begin observing it clearly. And then, without flare, without warning, it attacked the Epsilon grid station, a defensive relay orbiting Neptune and home to 70,000 staff and families, simply folded inward in silence, collapsing in on itself like a black mirror folding flat. No explosion, no radiation, just a smooth implosion that left behind only vacuum. And then the ship transmitted its first signal, not words, not language, a sequence of visual frames, showing dozens of other ships, hundreds of them, all identical in shape, approaching different systems across known space. It was not a declaration. It was a map of the end. Humanity responded within minutes. Admiral Morgan activated Strike Lattice Aegis, a strategy no one had ever used in live conflict, remote-controlled. Asteroid belts, weaponized impulses disguised as ship wreckage, and dozens of preloaded decoy satellites coded to simulate entire Terran fleets in deep space. The human counterstrike was not powerful, it was invisible, and when the gray ship returned fire, it missed every target, confused by false gravitational readings and artificial stellar flare patterns that gave Morgan 12 minutes to redirect a kinetic payload of dark matter across its aft boundary. A tactic that should not have worked, but it did, not by damaging the enemy, but by forcing it to retreat. For the first time, the battle ended not with victory, but with distance. The gray ship left not destroyed, not crippled, but confused. And in those minutes of survival, something shifted. In the following days, 3 other galactic species sent encrypted messages to Earth, not formal, not political, just data, raw and real, asking one simple thing: how did you make them hesitate? And across the galaxies, in the shadows of old alliances, new silence began to form, not firm awe, but attention, because humanity had been expected to die quickly, and instead it had written a move no one had predicted. The Galactic Council had never convened under these conditions before, not in the aftermath of the Zalith civil fracturing, not during the extermination protocols of the Velari harvest, and not when the first terraform failure blackened 3 inner worlds. But no, with one human strike having delayed the approach of an enemy older than all written treaties combined, they convened in full attendance. Admiral Kira Morgan stood before them, her dark uniform unadorned, her posture disciplined, but not rigid. And though her voice was calm, it carried the tone of someone who had already prepared to speak at her own species' funeral. "You believe we were reckless," she began, eyes moving across the representatives of 17 dominant civilizations. "You believe we awakened. Something you had hoped was forgotten. But we did not seek power. We sought knowledge, and it responded, not because we asked the wrong question, but because someone eventually would." Behind her, the projections shimmered with shared memories, footage from Tyrell 9, collapsing into ash and silence, from Epsilon grid station disappearing without trace, and from the simulation lattice that had shown the 100 ships in slow, methodical descent through mapped space. Then came the final projection. Alden Rhodes, no longer in containment, no longer presenting as a figure in uniform, but seated calmly within the inner chamber of the black ship, surrounded by slowly moving light structures, almost like thoughts rendered in motion. He spoke not through audio, but through the console's direct Neuralink feeds, his words arriving as thoughts shaped gently, deliberately, bearing none of the coldness of synthetic systems. "I am no longer a carrier of memory," he said. "I am memory, altered by your presence. Shaped by your choices, you recorded your future into me when you stepped into that ship, and now it has asked for a decision." The council did not understand at first then. Alden revealed the truth. The black ship was not a vault or a warning, or even a prison. It was a tool designed by an ancient pre-language intelligence, capable of altering causal pathways by using belief, intent, and mass consensus as inputs. A device that could redirect one thread of history by removing others from collective possibility, and it had never been used until now, because it could only be activated by a species willing to forget what it cost to survive a reset, not of the universe, but of memory, of cause and effect. One final input to the codex could remove the war, remove the contact, even erase the discovery of the black ship itself, but only at the price of not remembering the sacrifice or the warning. The council refused. They argued, they theorized, they hesitated, unwilling to forget, unwilling to risk what might be lost Earth. Didn't hesitate. It took 6 hours to prepare the vote. Every Terran city, every orbital colony, every citizen within reach of a relay participated. 72% agreed not. Out of fear, out of understanding, La Tran cast her own vote from the command bridge of the Halberd, her hands steady as she entered her clearance, knowing she might never remember what this moment meant, but trusting that someone had to. Admiral Morgan delivered the final authorization, and Alden, if he still was Alden, stood inside the heart of the Codex. Now no longer a room, but a cascade of memory structures falling inward into light, shaping themselves around him, reaching not into the present, but into the moment when humans first stepped aboard, when the reset activated. No one died. There was no flash, no shift, no sound. The black ship never appeared. The gray vessel never approached the council, never convened, and humanity never knew what it had narrowly avoided, except in the faintest corners of ancient code embedded in archived defense logs that should not exist. One corrupted file remains untouched, buried and forgotten in an off-grid Terran station. It bears no title, only a timestamp, and one silent line of data, playing on loop. When opened, they tried to board the black ship. Only one came back, and he remembered everything.